Hello, and welcome to the Postcode Revolution podcast, talking the future on your doorstep. I'm Jack Cooper, founder and director of Postcode Revolution, an organisation focused on community building and emergency climate adaptation in the neighbourhoods we call home. This series explores the ideas of Postcode Revolution to change the world of business as usual. Hello, and welcome back to the Postcode Revolution podcast. This week, I'm joined by the incredible Mahnaz Bhatti. Mahnaz is an NLP master coach, consultant, trainer, and founder of the Discovery Space, a local community coaching space where coaches offer their services in the spirit of the gift to their neighbourhood. Mahnaz was also a member of Waltham Forest Mutual Aid during the COVID pandemic, a network providing resources and support to 20 ward mutual aid groups. There's so much more I can say, but I think that's enough for now. Welcome to the podcast, Mahnaz.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. And I want to start with the story of the Discovery Space, Mahnaz. Could you explain to our listeners in more detail than I just did what it is and the story of how it came about?
Okay. So, in terms of context, I was running a coaching program to train people in the art of coaching. And a couple of them, after they'd finished the training, said, how do we practice? And I thought, well, there's no better way of practicing something that you're learning by doing it in the community. But before this, I have a daughter who was 5 years old at the time. There was a picture of a 5-year-old handcuffed at an airport in America because of the Trump ban against Muslims. And I was livid. I saw this picture. My daughter's the same age at the time. And I was really, really angry. And I remember the day very clearly. It was pouring with rain, and I was walking to the nursery, trying to compose myself as I was taking her to school, and my feet were wet because I didn't realize I had a hole in one of my boots. So I thought I'll go and get some new boots now because it's raining. So I dropped her at school and was going into town. And as I was on the underground going through Euston Station, I heard a busker playing a song. That's Not the Shape of My Heart by Sting, a song that is very deep for me, and I don't understand why. And my anger turned to tears, and I started crying on the train. I didn't care who was looking. I was just like, this is what's happening. I'm going to allow it. And then I went to the shoe shop, still crying, found my boots, the same ones that I always have. I bought the boots, crying at the counter. The sales assistant just looked at me with some sorry face, didn't ask any questions. And I walked out of the shoe shop and took a deep breath and thought, I need to do something. I need to do something to get people together, to get to know each other under the labels, through the perceived perception of our reality, whatever it may be, but just to see the human underneath it all. So I went back home, I picked the phone up and called a friend who's also a coach, lives near us. And I said to her, I really need to talk about creating something. And she said, great. When do you want to meet? And so we have the William Morris Gallery, which is very close to where we live. And I don't know if you know the history of William Morris. It's very community-minded, an incredible artist, and very inclusive, and in terms of aware of diversity and all of those things. So we met up at the coffee shop at William Morris Gallery and we had a chat. And Nat said, so what is it that you want to create? And I said, I don't know. I explained what had happened. And I said, I just need to hold a space for people to see each other as human, without the labels. And she said, okay, kind of like discovery environment. And I said, yeah, the Discovery Space. And so that's how it came about. And she said, "What's the agenda?" I said, "There is no agenda." She said, "Nobody will come if there's no agenda." I said, "But how do you know that?" She said, "I don't. Let's do it." So I said, "Don't have a venue, don't have funding. I'll do it around my dining room table." And so she said she'd invite a couple of parents from her school. I invited some parents from my school. And I also invited my at the then 85-year-old neighbor, who I see as my hero. I live in Chingford, which is very blue, very conservative. And Charles was the first person that I met when we moved into our home. And he basically helped me to get into the house after I'd locked myself out on the day that we arrived by lifting the gate to the side of our house. As an 85-year-old, he became my hero. So I invited him along. And I put some paper on the table with some pens, not knowing anything about what was going to happen. Had some cups ready for some tea, biscuits, and everybody came, not knowing what was going to happen, sat down, and we all introduced ourselves. And Charles said, "My name is Charles, I live across the road, and I go 3 weeks sometimes without human contact." And I thought, that's not going to happen on my watch. So since then, up until the day he passed, and my daughter and I went to visit him once a week, and I'd give him food. We'd have conversations, we'd laugh. He'd support me, whatever I was going through. It was just a listening ear. It was lovely just to be with him. I learned so much about the war, which he'd been in, and how he didn't like celebrating or being involved in D-Day. So there was loads that was going on that was really interesting. Anyway, so the other parents were sat around the table and were talking about things that were quite deep for them, that they'd never shared in public before or with even members of their own family. So we talked, some of them were doodling on paper, and there was some advice that was being said, some sharing of stories that they'd been through. And it got to 1:00 where it was ending, and I said, "Okay, time's up, guys. We need to go. We need to split." Nobody wanted to leave. And I thought, okay, there's something in this. There's something in this space, and I don't know what it is. So that's how it began. We've had discovery spaces run in Romania, in Sri Lanka, and the connections that are built through them have been massive, and it's localized in the place where people want to run them, but without a marketing budget, without people knowing that it exists. Some of them have gone flat. Word of mouth is the only way it travels at the moment, but I do think that this potentially could go global, because it's not just me in my privileged space that needs this. You know, it could be the fact that it ran in Sri Lanka with such success, with people who are trained as coaches and also those that haven't and have been victims of the environment that they are in, for whatever reason that might be. They found them hugely useful. So how these grow, I don't know. But what I do know is that the people that have been running them have loved and absolutely enjoyed hosting them. And I think that's the key here. It's not running it and hosting it. It's being in the circle with it. So you're not the expert. You're just there to hold the space and ask a question. Anyone can do that. Anyone has listening skills.
I'll be linking to the discovery space in the notes for this episode, and really hope that it does spread across the world. Thank you for sharing about it so beautifully.
Thank you for holding the space for me to do so. Bit of a discovery going on here as well.
There is indeed. There's indeed. And next, I'd
Yeah.
like to chat about Waltham Forest Mutual Aid, a local community support network you were part of during the COVID pandemic. Could you take us back to that time and how this response came about?
Yeah, obviously, we all went into lockdown and we were told not to leave our homes, and people were in a state of shock. And the government wasn't, or the councils weren't able to respond in the way that they were expected to be responding, because they'd never been through anything like that before. So for everybody, it was a shock, and it was interesting for me because I was like, what's going to emerge? What's going to happen here? I can't remember how it started, but I do remember that there was a message on social media that went out saying, if you'd like to get involved in supporting your neighbours, get in touch. Now, I didn't even know what mutual aid was then. I don't understand the concept, never heard of it. But what a brilliant idea. What an absolutely brilliant idea. So somebody suggested it and said, if you'd like to support your neighbours, then come to this WhatsApp group. And so I joined the WhatsApp group with a whole pile of other people. And then through those WhatsApp groups, there were some ward level WhatsApp groups that were created. So every council has wards, and each ward has a councillor or three councillors. And so whoever wanted to be proactive with it, just joined the ward group in which they lived. Now, with the mutual aid, that was a lot more urgent, because there were people that didn't have prescriptions, didn't have their medicines, didn't have food, basic necessities. People were isolated, couldn't go out. The elderly were feeling particularly afraid and vulnerable. And so there was a coordinator group, and then there were people who were just willing volunteers to go and do runs, like to the pharmacy or the supermarket. And I was sent a huge box of masks that I distributed to the elderly. My neighbour was going to the shops despite the lockdown because he needed goods. And I said, well, if you're going to do that, then just take a mask and just protect yourself, because Chris needs protecting. So everybody did their bit. One thing that was really interesting was the level of input that the councillors had, because they at that point had no power. Because they were like, oh, we're all equal in a pandemic with no labels, basically. Like, we're all human. We don't know what we can do. Council telling us what we can't do. But what can we do? Nobody's telling us. So from within community, this support, magical. And we got to know our neighbours a lot more because we wanted to help, particularly when you've got COVID. You can't go out, you can't do anything. So I had a point where I was like, yeah, I need a shop, please. And somebody do us a shop. And we paid them, and they'd get what we needed. And that was until the delivery drivers were back out on the streets. You know, it was much a support for me and my family as it was for other people on our street and in our community. And I also discovered things like, you know, there is no GDPR at a local level. You can hold people's addresses and phone numbers without violating data protection rules, because it's local and the power is there. We can meet each other and be with each other and speak to each other, even if it is outside our houses. So from that perspective, what I learned from that experience was people want to help. They genuinely want to help. Everybody wants to help each other. When there's no fear, people want to help. And there are no labels. There are no labels. There's no differentiation between, you know, whether you're politically aligned with one party or another. It doesn't matter. You want to help them. Whether they were of a certain faith or whatever, it didn't matter, because you wanted to go and help a human being, because it feels good to help somebody else. And it's uplifting. And I will just say on this note that there's a lady who is political, Faiza Shaheen, who was representing or part of the Labour Party at the time, who was actively involved in her group, in her cluster in Woodford, and supported the mutual aid group with her in a very authentic way, right from the very beginning. And she's very much about community empowerment at a local level. So, and she's had a lot of stuff happen with her since then, in terms of being dismissed from the Labour Party 3 weeks before the general election, which was shocking, but telling. And so, when it comes to community and the value of community, and just as human beings want to help each other, that is a natural thing for humans to want to help, to connect, to be with each other, irrelevant of difference. But it's interesting how when everything, all the power comes back to the perceived power spaces, it changes again.
That was incredibly interesting and really valuable to hear about the authentic experiences of community, both pre and during a time of great distress and emergency. In the context of postcode revolution, I'm looking at mutual aid groups as ways of also dealing with climate and ecological breakdown, broadly include pandemics within. Do you think that the response, say, happens now, will be better because of having experienced these groups being set up? Do you think that the response will be similar, or do you think that the response will be very different this time?
Good question. I think the government and the councils are so unprepared. Now they're going to be business as usual, and they will say, they might even tap into the mutual aid, and give them whatever they need. I think from a human perspective, as somebody who's living through it, it affected people mentally, emotionally, physically, in so many ways. Wherever I am, my personal response will be to help. First, to make sure I'm okay, then to make sure my family are okay, and then to get out there and help other people to make sure they're okay. And if I have to open my door to let people in, then I would do that. Because, you just don't know, Jack, when the help is required. For you, if I open my door to somebody, I know that they'd open their door to me if it was needed. So I do think that the natural response is, yes, am I okay? My family okay? My family, and I mean like my immediate family where I live. And then are my neighbors okay? And is my street okay? And I think I would reconnect with them. And now, I mean, it's really interesting because I do think that other people would want to be coordinators that have moved into our street. They're so lucky. Like, I know that they'd want to. And I know that, one of them plants fruit and veg in her garden. And she would be feeding people. I wish I could do the same. But I think there's a preparation, despite having gone through what we've gone through, because the context might be different, but the need would be the same. I mean, we're all built differently. It's not always going to be, how do I help others? Some people might be like, I need to protect what I've got. It's a different mindset. How do I protect what I've got so others don't come and take it? That's a fear mindset. The opposite is, I want to go and help others. It's a loving mindset. And it's a wider more open mindset, which will then bring community together. But if you're protecting what you've got, it's so closed and fearful, there's always going to be lack in an ironic kind of way, because you're on your own. You're not with others, not building, you're protecting and saving and isolating yourself at the same time, which actually isn't very positive in the long run.
Thank you, Mahnaz. That's really, really interesting, and again, a beautiful description and analysis of something that's, I think, in many ways we're lacking, and hopefully the paradigm is shifting. And in the context of postcode revolution, it's, for myself, it's this dual approach focused on adaptation and transformation, and recognizing the need to adapt to climate and ecological breakdown, which is unfortunately a reality now and has been all around the world, but increasingly for the UK and Europe. 2024 has in some ways been the year of recognizing, oh, it's here with us now. And then so that's, for me, is an important part, is looking at that emergency preparedness adaptation side, and then the transformation side, which is looking at community and nature and energy, and how we can transform the way we live, with a focus not on the fear and safety of disaster, but in terms of looking at the joy and happiness and light that comes from living in closer connection with nature, with low energy living, and with community. So
beautiful.
Those two things are, the two wings in many ways of what I'm trying to do, and to recognize that, in people who are very concerned about climate change, environmentalists like myself will be more drawn towards the adaptation side.
Yeah.
But then there are many others who may be more drawn towards the community side, the nature side, energy side, and attempting to recognize that different things motivate different people, but that there's a shared need or sense of kind of belonging, fulfillment that can be obtained through many different pathways of action in the first Postcode and Burgess. So that could be the Postcode Book Club, which my dad set up. I set up Postcode Energy Group because that was more what I was looking to do with it, with the climate and energy. But the Postcode Book Club continues to meet to this day, and has brought a real great sense of togetherness to the community around that interest in reading and books. And
I'm very conscious of, like, the pandemic was part of the meta crisis. So, that's an example of what is to come in terms of one context. I'm wondering if if you think about where all of this comes from and how these little things have been created, like the Discovery Space or mutual aid or whatever it is, or even Postcode Revolution, it's like, where is that starting from? And the idea comes into somebody's mind to create this, but they're all doing the same thing, if that makes any sense. So it's almost like, and this is really reassuring for me, because it's happening. I think there are hundreds of these things happening across the world. They probably already happen in community in the global south, but I think it's becoming more and more important in the global north. I mean, when I was growing up, I didn't know my neighbors at all, maybe one or two, but that was it. Now I know everybody, and I think my sisters know all their neighbors. and my family know all their neighbors now. But there's like an evolving, naturally conscious evolution of how important community is because of the shit we find ourselves with, the types of governments and party systems that we're in, the political systems that we're living in. And I think there's a natural call, even like from an environmental space in terms of climate, there is a natural call for community and connection. So it's reassuring for me that you come up with this idea, you know, and that there are many others that have probably come up with ideas around this, which can't be controlled. Not a hyperlocal level. You can't control it. You know, you would select the best counsellor for your community when you know your community. At the moment, we're just selecting the best of a bunch that we don't know. We don't know any of them.
Mm. And I think for me that's definitely one of the key things I want to emphasize and really do recognize with postcode revolution, that it's in many ways, in so many ways, it's not new. And I emphasize the other meaning of revolution, which can mean a movement in a circle, and as well as a paradigm shift. And it may seem somewhat new to us in the UK in 2024, have lived in a state market paradigm for our entire lives, and haven't grown up knowing neighbours. But then also even in, as you say, in the global south, in different places in the UK, for example, there seems to be a greater sense of community solidarity in the north, for example, that in my postcode in Brighton, one of our members who's sadly leaving us is from Liverpool, and spoke about how much of a community culture shock it was coming to Brighton, and there not being this sense of being able to just chat with anyone and the people around you. And so it's definitely something of a weird environment perhaps that
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wonder because the big cities like Brighton, London are so busy. Like everybody's busy getting from one place to the next. There's no time to stop and be still. But then in the north, there's a slower pace of life. And it's not, you know, there's a balance, more of a balance of work life. I wonder if it's the thinking, the hurriedness of society that stops these connections from happening. Because when COVID hit, you had no choice but to slow down and stop and ask questions. Yeah, your level of curiosity goes through the roof, and not knowing as well. But when you're busy doing life, and I mean doing, there is no curiosity and there are no questions.
Mm.
Not the big
And
ones.
what advice do you have on navigating political polarization in community spaces from both the discovery space and the mutual aid groups?
Stay away from it. Don't talk about it. It's so hard though, isn't it, Jack? Because because I was like, after everything that happened with Faiza Shaheen, for example, and she was deselected from the Labour Party, I was like, you've got to bloody win this seat. You know, it became personal. It was like, this is just so out of order, which a lot of people felt. You've got to get this seat. And again, the same mindset, loyalty to the Labour Party. Whoever they select, will vote for them because it's the party politics, not the individual. More generalizations with that. I mean, it's just like, it's surprising to me. It's not actually. People will go where they feel safe and where they will go with who they feel safe with, whether that's a party or a person. But from a political standpoint, you know, what if you had a prime minister who was a young woman who's come from a state school education in the Midlands, who just loves people. Would that be a possibility in this day and age? No. But could she influence her community? Yes. Could she stand out in her community? Yes. Does she need to be eaten educated? No. But there's a myth that, you have to be a certain ilk to be the right person for the job. And what we need is more people that have lived a life, really. Why don't we have a doctor that's running healthcare in the government? Why do we not have an accountant or somebody who's qualified as an economist running the budget? Why don't we have a prime minister who's lost a lot in his own life and learned from experiences that cares about the people in the country? It's a mess. I don't like the political system that we have. The system is wrong. It's broken. But people believe in it. It's all we have. But what else could we have? I do think local politics will change. It has to. And it has to come from grassroots. It has to come from within the community in which it's being represented. So shipping someone over from another borough doesn't work. They don't know the streets. They don't know the people.
Yeah.
How do you change beliefs, Jack? How do you change people's beliefs? So, yep, I'm a conservative. My parents are conservative. It's the same as football. How do you start supporting Man United if you're a Liverpool fan? It's that hard. It's that hard. It's like a religion. Liverpool are my team, or whatever team it is. It's like, where does that ingrained loyalty lie and come from? And why do you become a bad person? Because you changed your mind. I'm no longer a fan. How dare you? The context is irrelevant. It's the human collective. That community. Every football team has a community of people that are loyal to that team. Whether it's politics or football, or whatever you want to choose, it's the same. People are loyal. Even though in that loyalty, they don't see the truth.
Yeah. Thank you, Mahnaz. That's really great way of putting that, and I really resonate with that. Thank you.
A friend of mine said the other day, it's like, we live in a barrel, and the barrel is real, but you have a little hole in the barrel, and you look through it, and you say, "Oh my God, there's so much more out there." But nobody really looks out that hole. They stay in the barrel, and they're comfortable in that barrel, and we're going to be made to feel uncomfortable, and that barrel is going to shatter. Then what?
Yeah. And my second to last question for you is related to looking through that barrel. My question's around education and the move that you were making to Bali for your daughter to go to the green school.
Yeah.
And for those listeners who don't know, the green school is a really quite revolutionary new way of approaching education from all ages pretty much, and includes Clover Hogan, the environmental activist, as amongst its alumni, and is a way of educating children with nature, ecology at the core, and care for nature at the core. So we're recording this, by the time that I'm going to be releasing this, you'll be in Bali. But just in the context of the Green School, could you just speak to this in some ways what's could call an ecological paradigm shift in education that the school.
So the reason why we decided to take our daughter, she's 12 at the moment, out of the UK education system is not because she's struggling in it. She has, like the change from primary to secondary was incredibly hard. The pressure on an 11-year-old, 10, 11-year-old is just too big, too much. And the change is huge. But I think when we researched the Green School, there's no uniform. So their identity is theirs. It's not the identity of the school, which is really interesting. As I say that, I'm really becoming aware that the kids' identities are tied to the school, which then gets tied to football or politics or da 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 da. Not all of them are loyal, and some of them are very disloyal. But so there's no uniform. They don't have to wear shoes. They are leading their education themselves. It's project-based learning. So the kids are given a project. They decide on what project they want to run. And they will run the project and do everything they need to do to learn about how to present it in terms of written, visual, art, spoken, whatever it is that they need to learn to present it. And it gives them a different way of learning. So it's not go and do your English and your maths. It's like the English and the maths will come through you doing this project, which makes sense, doesn't it? And it's also, it's so immersive in terms of they're living in a forest. They are living with the creatures of the forest side by side. It's what the child wants to find out about and explore through critical thinking, which children are not taught necessarily in a classroom.
It sounds a really inspiring, innovative ecological school, which, yeah, surprisingly wasn't around in Burgess Hill back in 2012.
True.
But hopefully can be part of a wave and a movement of schools like this
Yeah.
around the world. And
Yeah.
I believe that education and transforming our education is so important to our civilization and the way we think, and to have a revolution in education for me is so
Yeah.
important to the changing reality.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Education in terms of its meaning, educate. It's not about me giving the knowledge to you. It's about pulling the knowledge out of you. You've already got it. You came into the world with it. Infinite knowledge, not small brain knowledge. I'm talking about infinite knowledge. But what happens if I pull this infinite knowledge out of you rather than me telling you what you need to, my small brain needs to be mapped onto your brain rather than, well, hold on a minute. What if I pull out of you what you're here to do in this moment, or the knowledge that you have within you, which is way bigger than what's out here? I mean, as is in the universe, so is inside, but we never look inside. That's the problem. Child-led learning is powerful, incredible. They're raw. Kids are raw.
And this brings us on to, yeah, so important. And I don't say that just because my parents are both teachers.
Are they really? I didn't know that.
Primary. So, yeah,
Wow.
definitely shaped by education in more ways than one. Slightly, perhaps slightly biased messenger there in that.
Yeah.
I can prove it.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the final question, Manaz, is something that I've asked all of my guests. Could you recommend a film, a book, and a podcast to listeners who would want to continue thinking and engaging with what we've been speaking about, and you feel like you would like to share?
Yeah. I've been having a think about this because you mentioned that you were doing this at the end, and because of where I am right now, one of the things in terms of films that I would recommend is a film that many years ago, I think it was 20 years ago, it got released, that really affected me deeply, and I couldn't really it changed something within me. But when I went to the screening of it in Bath, there was a shaman that came, a Native American Indian shaman that came, and before the screening, he was doing a talk, and he was talking about how he had a dream that his great grandson was going to America, going to find out where his land was, and he had to swim underwater, go underwater to get to the place that his great grandfather was born. And this was 20 years ago, and I remember how impacted I was by those words that he spoke, and I didn't know anything about climate change at the time, so I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what he was talking about. But the film that really was profoundly impactful for me, I feel like at that time was On the Edge, was a film called What the Bleep Do We Know? And it's a Canadian film, it's a documentary. They've made different versions of it, but the original film, which is a film about a lady who's deaf, going through life and her experience of life as she was going through these different stages of emotions in the journey that she takes. And it's also based on quantum physics, so it's really interesting, which is where science meets spirituality. And that really turned a lot for me in my life. It was a turning point. So I'd recommend What the Bleep Do We Know, which is a film. Don't go near the rabbit hole films because they're like spin-offs from the original, and they really do go down a rabbit hole. But it's a lovely story, a lovely film to watch, and very insightful. That's for the film. As far as the book's concerned, I've read so many. I mean, obviously, I'm going to recommend Kim's book.
It's called At the Edge, What Is Mine to Do?
Brilliant book. That's one. But the other one that I really want to recommend was recommended to me by an incredible woman in Scotland. It was just the most authentic person I think I know. But very powerful, very powerful. I think she's a bit of a white witch. It's called Edgewalkers. And it's a book. It's about people. It's basically people and organizations that take risks, build bridges, and break new ground, by Judy Neal, Judi Neal, Neal. And I could not put that book down. I was like, wow, this is what we need. It felt like, it was like speaking to me and where I am when I read it, when I was reading it. So that's powerful, really powerful book. And the podcast came from the Edge retreat, actually, because I'd never even heard of Joanna Macy until I was on the retreat. And I've been listening, so this is very current. I've been listening to this podcast called The Great Turning. We Are the Great Turning. And it's been so insightful in terms of the rawness of the conversations that take place, like the real triggers, the emotional triggers, the reality of the humanness of us as a species. That has been, it's just been brilliant. And I've cried listening to it. I've laughed, and I think that's the key. The great turning is the honesty of society today, and being, really raw, emotionally raw about the world that we're in today, and knowing that changes, and that emotion changes and will change. And it's okay to feel the way you feel, whatever that feeling is, knowing it will pass. But it makes everything so real, I think, for me. It's just like, there's going to be good and bad. Without judgment, there's going to be moments of difference, whatever that means. And it's okay. And we don't need to be stuck in one way or another. And that's okay. And we are so powerful in that. So powerful as creators in that. You know, it's from 1 minute to the next. Where is this motorway leading to on this A road? And where is this A road leading to in a lane? And where does it end up in what city? And, you know, where there's no labels, we don't know what's going to happen next. And it's okay. It's just like we are the unfolding. It's like we are that unfolding. It's not out there. It's all inside. And that was just, yeah, it was beautiful. So there are my 3 recommendations.
Thank you.
Hope you
Thank
enjoy them.
you, Mahnaz. Yeah. So, yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing those. So, yeah, relevant in different ways to what we spoke about, and they sound fantastic. So, yeah, I would like to check them out, and I'm sure many of our listeners would.
Enjoy.
And yeah, so that brings us to the end of the conversation. And yeah, I just want to thank you and honor your presence and beautiful words. And I'm so glad we've had this conversation.
Thank you, Jack. Can I say a few words? Like, I need to say this. So I've always struggled with voice. And the reason why I say that is because I believe that, you know, I hear so much in silence, which I love. I love it. But I've never really thought my voice was anything to be heard. But for some reason, when you invited me to do this, I've said no to many podcasts, I've said no to trainings, I've said no to lots of things. But for some reason, with you asking me, I felt like there's something that's coming together here that is bigger than my voice. And I said yes, because my voice is just a tiny part of it. And it's there, and it's there for a reason. So I want to thank you for doing this, because voices are important, especially the ones that don't fit the narrative. And I'm realizing that more and more and more. I really want to thank you for doing this and inviting me to do this, because it is so different and it is so needed.
Thank you, Mahnaz, and thank you everyone for listening to this, and we'll see you next week. Thank you. This podcast was produced and edited by me, Jack Cooper, with music by Lisa Mira and Boomtown. Please rate and share the podcast if you enjoyed it, and if you'd like to support Postcode Revolution and dive deeper into these ideas, you can become a supporter for £5 a month on Patreon and access the extended cut of this conversation and all the others in the series. Thanks for listening. See you in 2 weeks.